For our audiences in Istanbul, and good morning to Arizona. Welcome to the second of Global Transformations ASU-BİLGİ Talk Series. My name is Aslı Tunç. I'm a professor of media studies and communication and also the vice rector at İstanbul-BİLGİ University. Before leaving the ground to this fascinating discussion, I would like to emphasize how pleased I am to witness two unique institutions coming together today. What a great way to mark two universities, Arizona State and Bilgi's academic collaboration by fostering inspiring intellectual encounters among great minds. Today, we are hosting two very different researchers from very different areas of interest, yet they succeeded to find common ground for an interesting conversation. It's such an honor to be introducing Dr. Jim Bell. He is a professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University, an adjunct professor in the Department of Astronomy at Cornell, and a distinguished visiting scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Jim's research group primarily focuses on the geology, geochemistry, and mineralogy of planets, moons, asteroids, and comets using data obtained from telescopes and spacecraft missions. Jim is an active planetary scientist and has been heavily involved in many NASA robotic space exploration missions, including the Near Earth Asteroid Rendezvous, Mars Pathfinder, Comet Nucleus Tour, Mars Rover Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance, Mars Odyssey Orbiter, Mars Renaissance Orbiter, and Lunar Renaissance Orbiter. Jim was the lead scientist in charge of the panoramic camera color stereoscopic imaging system on the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, is a deputy principal investigator at the Mastcam camera system in the Curiosity rover, and is a principal investigator for the Mastcam Z cameras on NASA's Perseverance Mars rover in 2020. And I would like to introduce a dear friend of almost 2 decades, Feride Çiçekoğlu. She is a professor at Film Department at İstanbul-BİLGİ University and Director of Film and Television Graduate Program. She holds a BA and an MA in Architecture from Middle East Technical University in Turkey. She was a Fulbright Scholar during her PhD studies at University of Pennsylvania. After her first script about historical building in Istanbul won an award, she adapted her first novella, Don't Let Them Shoot the Kite, to screen. The film was the Academy Award nominee from Turkey in 1989. She co-scripted Journey to Hope, which won 1990 Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Çiçekoğlu has been teaching courses in visual culture, film, and architecture at Bilgi for more than 2 decades. Her key areas of study are representation, adaptation, narration, gender, and space in cinema. The topic of the conversation today will be Scenes from the Red Planet, conversations between a planetary scientist and a film scholar. Please welcome Jim Bell and Feride Çiçekoğlu.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Feride. Thank you so much
to be together with you again.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. It's such a great honor to be with you and to be celebrating this great collaboration between our universities.
Likewise. And I have been looking forward to this, not only as a formal event uniting the two universities, but also with the feeling of meeting a friend. Although we have not known each other too much, I really feel this kinship with you, that we both are basically storytellers, whatever else we do, because I love reading your scientific work. You make it accessible. And I'm not a fan of space studies, but I think I am starting to be, just owing to the way you present stuff, because about Hubble legacy, which I would love to hear more from you directly. When you say looking deep into space, by definition, means looking back in time. This gives me ideas for, I don't know, 10 different scripts. But I will spare our listeners because I'm sure they don't want to hear them, but they
So
want to hear you, how at its 30th anniversary, you sort of celebrated the Hubble Telescope in 2020. We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite machines, inventions that humans have made. And the Hubble Space Telescope, which has been up there working for 30 years now more than 30 years, it really is a time machine. You know, we talk about science fiction time machines and the H.G. Wells novel and all these, you know, other science fiction stories. But it's true because, you know, like it or not, we're all limited. There's a speed limit that Einstein set for us, and that's called the speed of light, right? So when you're out at the beach in a sunny day and, you know, the sun is basking on your face, that sunlight left our star 8.5 minutes ago. You know, it just takes that long. It's that far, 93 million miles, 150 million kilometers. And you know, when we look through a telescope at maybe the Andromeda galaxy, you know, this spectacular, beautiful spiral galaxy, you can see it even through small telescopes or binoculars. You know, those photons, that light, that took 2 million years to get to us, right? And so we see the universe as it was, not as it is, right? And Hubble is the ultimate time machine for doing that because it's above the Earth's atmosphere. We don't have the clouds, the twinkling of the stars that we see for those of us earthbound observers. It's above the atmosphere, and it's a big 2.4 meter mirror. You know, you just fit it in a school bus. You know, it's a big telescope, and it can see deeper into space than we've ever been able to see before. And that means farther back in time, right? And Hubble can see almost back to the beginning, 12 billion, 13 billion years. You know, Hubble has shown us, has proven to us, the reason it's named Hubble, right, is this astronomer, Edwin Hubble, was the first to realize all the galaxies are flying apart from each other. And if you measure how they're flying apart and you turn the clock back, you get to the Big Bang 13.6 billion years ago. It's incredible that we know that, right? That we know that space and time came into existence 13.6 billion years ago, right? And it blows my mind. I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not a cosmologist. I'm really a geologist, right? I like to kick rocks and go out in the field. But you know, what does that mean? That space and time were created, right? So what was before that? Well, you can't even ask that question, right? Because time was created as we know it. So I've used the Hubble Space Telescope myself for very close to home solar system work, mostly Mars. For a long time, Hubble could do things scientifically about Mars that we weren't doing with the orbiters and landers and rovers. And so we're filling in a lot of the gaps with Hubble there. So I'm just a big fan of these kinds of things that we do as humans. It's an international project. It's not just NASA. The European Space Agency and others are involved as well. And people from around the world use that facility. You have to write a proposal. It's very competitive. Most proposals get rejected because there's so many people want to use it for their science. And I think it's worth celebrating these kinds of amazing, visionary, impactful projects that we do as a species.
Jim, when you quantify, you know, how old our universe is and how deep we look, you put it in a nutshell. And sometimes people I know ask you questions, you know, when the universe is sort of moving apart from each other, how long it will take. And I remember you saying at one time, I wouldn't lose my sleep over it, which,
Yes.
which still makes me laugh because it's both fascinating and also a bit, of course, it's scary trying to grasp the limits. Would you think we sort of make up stories and invent alternative ways of life to cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, our lifetimes, our human lifetimes are, you know, minuscule compared to the geologic lifetime of our planet, the astronomical lifetime of our star, and of the entire universe, right? And so how do you cope in our limited minds with the temporary nature of our existence, with the fact that on the grand scale, one could argue the universe doesn't care about us, right? Who cares, right? We're just a little speck of dust on a little speck of dust around an average star among 2 trillion stars in the universe. Why does it matter? Oh, you can quickly go down the angst pathway, right? But then the flip side of that is, to me, it's like, how wonderful that we're aware of this. How incredible is it that a tiny part, at least one tiny part, maybe more, at least one tiny part of that incredible universe, galaxy, solar system, clouds of gas and dust that condense and organize, and at least one part of that has become self-aware and recognizes the scale of it and the magnitude of it and the importance of it. So yes, I agree, it can be a little bit daunting. I think it's also incredibly uplifting.
What I have enjoyed very much, and I'm enjoying now also, while asking questions to you and pondering about the answers, is that you always put two sides together. And I think in daily life, we sometimes forget that. And also, I remember us talking about the first visual data from Mars. And I had asked you, and will ask you now again, having designed the cameras, which sort of saw, quote unquote, that images for the first time, how you feel about it. And also the both sides of those cameras, you know, how deep they can look and how wide they can look. And yeah, how does it feel to be the person who has designed it?
Yeah, simple questions to answer. No, and I, you know, I think we have common ground among the sciences and the arts, in that we think a lot about a sense of place and a sense of space. Yes. Right. It was interesting when Asu was introducing you and talked about your interest in gender studies and space. And she didn't mean the kind of space that I mean, right? And so I want to hear from you about, you know, what's your interest in space, both the space that you have been dealing with in terms of human interactions, global policy, et cetera. But, you know, we're talking about space, like actual space, right? So there's a flip side I want to hear more about from you. But you're right in that, you know, we think about a sense of place in space exploration, and it's very much analogous to maybe the way that a tourist would think. Or, you know, we were talking earlier, I want to come visit Istanbul, right? I would love to see so much of the amazing nation Turkey, and it's so much history, and I love architecture and culture, all that stuff. One regret about this is that we're not in person, right? Either in Phoenix or Istanbul, and we'll get there. We'll do that. So I have to imagine the place in my mind. I've got some information from tourist guides and television documentaries I've watched, et cetera, some of your films, and so I have a sense of that place, but I've never been, right? And but so I rely on others to tell those stories, to give me the visuals. And in a space exploration, it's exactly the same thing, really. I've never been to Mars. None of us have been to Mars, right? I would love to go. I want to come back, by the way. I don't want to stay there. I want to come back, because Earth is my favorite planet. But we get a sense of the place. Our sense of the place comes from these robotic avatars that have gone, that send our senses, our sight, our touch, our mobility, our ability to sniff and smell and sense chemicals, right? All of that is manifested for now in these robots, and so we have to experience the place through that and their lenses, literally their lenses, right? And it's challenging. It's wonderful to see these pictures and other data sets come back and to see how similar much of the landscape of a place like Mars is to the Earth, especially here in the desert Southwest of the US. Lots of similarities, red rocks, not much vegetation, very dry. But at the same time, mentally recognizing that that environment is incredibly hostile to us. We would not survive without a spacesuit and radiation protection and oxygen and our own water and food supply. That environment, which looks so Earth-like and so compelling to us, is actually trying to kill us in so many ways, right? There's no end to the number of ways we would die if we weren't fully prepared to be in that environment. And so that juxtaposition is there in that sense of place. And we get the chemical information, we get the pressure and temperature of the atmosphere, we get all the quantitative information. But visually, it's a feast and a famine at the same time.
Yep. Thank you so much. It is food for thought, as usual, what you have said. I'll just say a few sentences about gender and space, so that we don't pass. Our ways of seeing through cinema is not very old either. It's just 125 years, and it's a completely new way of seeing. And one of my favorite films is from 1962, Cleo, Sengaset, by Agnes Varda, which is a story about the story of just 2 hours of a woman from 5 to 7, when she is waiting to get the results of her medical report. And she's worried because she wants to learn, basically it's this, is it cancer or not? And it's 1960s and she's very much worried. She's a very beautiful singer and blonde and very attractive, tall, someone who everybody looks at. And here comes space and gender. So the first half of the film, she's walking around in the streets of Paris, beautiful black and white images, and everybody is looking at her because, the gaze does not work both ways for genders, as you probably know. I don't know how it is on Mars, but on Earth, usually that's how it works. But the second half of the film, she changes her aura. She changes the way she has dressed, and she stops looking at the mirrors, and she stops being worried about how she is seen, and she starts looking around, and the whole city changes, because then she is the protagonist of her own life, and she has agency. So we can, what you described made me think people who came from the rural areas to the city in 1950s, 60s to Istanbul, for example. The population of Istanbul was 1 million in 1960. Now it is 16 million. I mean, the official. We don't know how much it is non-official. And it's a funny story that my grandfather had stopped taking buses in 1960. He said, it's too crowded. I can't I can't cope with the city anymore. Wow. So you can compare. And all those people who came from the rural areas, especially women, I think it was a very hostile environment, and they did not know if they could survive. And we have a lot of films and stories of what happened to them. So I think it's, although the factual base changes, when you translate it into concepts and into just very philosophical. At the philosophical level, it's not that difficult. I mean, you have to wear a spacesuit on Mars, and if you are someone from the rural area, you have to cover yourself if you are a woman to feel safe. So maybe it's basically the same.
Very interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So Jim, Aslı, you have to warn me that we are here basically to listen to Jim. So you say shut up and ask questions.
No.
I remember that we discussed also last time. We both, I think, have come of age during 20th century, and it was a time when, when there was a radio broadcast saying that the Martians had invaded Earth. Quite a number of people could believe that. In less than a century, that has changed. I mean, our grasp of the universe has changed very much. Do you think that has, I won't ask as abstract a question as did it make us happier, but do you think it has given us more tools to control our fate, or yeah.
No, it's a great question, and certainly, that story, that radio broadcast from the 1930s, was sensationalist and caused quite a lot of media and public interest and some concern. I think the medium and the technology has changed, but there's still an enormous amount of sensationalism and an enormous amount of propagation of misinformation that still happens through the media, and that affects an enormous number of our fellow human beings, right? And to try to be in contrast to that, the scientific method is constantly effectively doing battle with misinformation, with the the conflict between being skeptical versus trusting an authoritative source, right? We still struggle as a civilization with that, right? And maybe that's something that's just built into us in human nature. We have a fight or flight reflex that goes back hundreds of thousands of years that has allowed us to be here, right? And not to get eaten by the lions or whatever. And so being able to stop, think critically, think for yourself, react to observations that you see for yourself or that are from authoritative sources, and change your mind. I mean, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing. It's a hallmark of science. It defines what science is as a process, right? In the face of observations that conflict with your hypothesis must change, right? And it can't be a theory until you've tested it against so many observations, so many scenarios. Then you can use the word theory. People use it's my pet peeve. People use the word theory wrong all the time. I have this theory that he's in love with her, but no, that's your hypothesis. It's not a theory. And but I think that struggle between misinformation and those who peddle it and profit from it, going back 100 years and more, versus the seeking the truth and remaining critical but informed and willing to modify your worldview in the face of compelling observations. That struggle, that tension, it's still here. Maybe it will always be with us. I don't know, but it's still here.
I remember us talking about the War of the Worlds, and it was that broadcast was just between the two so-called world wars. So it was a time of conflict. we cannot say our times are without conflict, but on the other hand, maybe the nature of conflict has changed, and especially with the climate change, I think we became aware that we have one planet and we share it. And so we had also discussed whether going out into space and seeing our planet enhances some kind of belonging, and this is home. I like very much you repeat saying this is home and this is my favorite planet. So I don't want to stay there. This is a theme which comes up various comments. So do you really feel, going out into the space or being aware of how we are seen from far away might help us to realize our unity in this planet?
Yeah, I do. And, you can trace the origins of the modern environmentalist movement to the late 1960s and early 1970s and the first photographs of the Earth from space taken by the astronauts on their way to the moon or in Earth orbit. And, that whole Earth view is something that we have really a perspective that we've never had before, right? You don't see national boundaries like you see on maps. You don't see economic borders. You don't see political, philosophical differences. You don't see any of that from space. What you see is a beautiful blue marble with a very fragile, thin atmosphere that is our cocoon that keeps us protected from the harsh space environment. And when we look around our solar system, you don't see anything else like it, right? Even Mars, which is the most Earth-like place in the solar system, is dramatically different from the Earth. It's not a place that we could just go and live. There's nowhere else in the solar system that we could just go and live, and there probably never will be, right? And people will eventually go out and settle on moon bases and settle on Mars and live on other planets. That will happen. But over time, they won't be part of our species anymore. Like the question that somebody asked is, will humans evolve into another species, right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We are creatures of our environment. We have been modified by evolution as our environment changes. And so over long periods of time, that will happen again when people move into space, and it'll be different for people living on the moon versus people living on with that gravity and that environment versus Mars versus an asteroid or whatever. We'll see multiple branches of the human species. Now I'm talking hundreds, thousands of years into the future, right? Not tomorrow. But that getting back to your question, that perspective, I think it's critically important. It's critically important that that everybody realize how special this place is, right? And we learn about the Earth by studying other planets and compare and contrast. We learn about the Earth by studying the Earth from space and from the ground. And huge numbers of researchers around the world trying to understand our climate, our geology, the future of our planet, how to live sustainably in this world. And for me, people living in space, which is inevitable, they are going to have to absolutely excel at sustainability, right? They're going to be a harsh environment. They're not going to want to have to bring everything from the Earth. They're going to have to figure out how to live off the land wherever they are. And all of that technology that allows them to live sustainably, I firmly believe it's all going to come back here to our planet and help the vast majority, almost all of us who don't get to go live and travel in space. I mean, this is going to be the home for the human species forever. So I think that perspective that the space program has given us is becoming part of our cultural awareness and part of our planetary awareness as citizens of this third rock from the sun, not as citizens of country A, country B, country C.
Aslı, would you like to contribute with any questions, or would you like to become part of the discussion before? I mean, I have millions of more questions, but I don't want to put to grasp.
This is a conversation between you two guys. I'm not going to go in between. So you can go ahead. We can ask questions afterwards. I'm seeing, you know, a lot of professors whom we know. Probably we will get, you know, questions from them as well.
I suggest we start getting questions and then we come back to our conversation, because
Sure,
we might get different perspectives.
Okay. We have a question from Didem, actually. Most contemporary science fiction accepts interstellar travel plus colonization as a given. Does it make sense? What would you suggest to storytellers who are interested in creating fictional worlds, interplanetary, near or far future settings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, you know, in my experience, there's two different approaches to this. One approach is you basically suspend reality and the laws of physics as we know them. And you say, okay, I'm going to assume that I can travel much faster than the speed of light. I'm going to assume I can magically transport matter from here to there by making it sparkle and disappear and show up over there. You know, I'm going to assume, you know, it doesn't, I can travel anywhere in the solar system or another solar system really quickly in a direct path, you know, and those are all, I think, fun and sometimes important assumptions, like, you know, who would want to watch a television show or a movie where they spend 98% of it just traveling in a slow arc to get from one planet to the next, right? Talk about boring, right? So some of it is artistic license and the need for narrative to move forward. And that's totally understandable. So, and lots of authors and filmmakers choose that approach. And the other approach is to try to be more pragmatic and realistic. What is actually achievable? You know, what will it be like to put 6 people in a school bus for 6 months and have them travel through the vacuum of space, and then get to a place where there's no food, no water, no oxygen, harsh radiation, and extremely cold temperatures, you know, and you know, maybe you've seen or read the book or seen this movie, The Martian. You know, to me, even though there was some artistic license in that's the closest that I've seen to a potentially accurate description of something like 15 to 20 years in the future of what it might be like for a crew of people to go out into deep space. You know, lots of hardships, lots of danger, lots of problems. And so, you know, the more realistic side doesn't need to invent conflict. It exists between those environments and the environment that we need as humans, but physically and psychologically to survive. And so I've seen successful examples of successful storytelling and writing, in my opinion, from that perspective as well. So I think the first step maybe an author or filmmaker needs to take is, how do I want to approach this? Do I want to be fanciful and look to the far future and suspend reality and tell stories that don't rely so much on the pragmatic technology, et cetera? Or do I want to try to project a story, tell a story that might actually come true or be realistic to a reader or viewer as something that could really happen or be happening?
Yes, we have a question from Sandy Lewis. I think everyone can read it, right? Can you read it, Jim?
It would be great if you read it and we hear it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, how can we extrapolate from the fascinating interstellar explorations to solutions of very each bound problems like poverty, social conflict, ideological difference, women's lives, etc. What are the interplanetary possible solutions to our earthly existence, earthbound?
Yeah, great question. It's something that I know a lot of us who are involved in space exploration are always looking for the connections. How do we bring that back here? In what ways can we bring that back here? Right. I gave a talk once, and somebody in the audience asked a question. It's like, why do I need the space program? I have GPS on my phone. Wait a minute. Do you know that is the space program, right? And so the point there is that there are so many ways that the technology that comes from space exploration kind of leaks its way back into our modern society, right? Communications is an example, all kinds of software, the whole revolution in batteries that's happening for electric cars, a lot of that instigated by the space program. So governments around the world who invest in technology that's related to space are also investing in their economy and their society. That's just the reality of the world today. And it's often very difficult to say, how does this Mars probe help global poverty? It's like, wow, gosh, is there a direct connection? No, there are indirect connections through the technology. And two other indirect connections I think are super important. One is education, right? I mean, I think it's maybe universal on our planet that kids are turned on by space, right? By space exploration, by astronauts, by rockets, by the idea of traveling in space. I've often thought if you could write a book or teach a class in space, bugs, and dinosaurs, you'd have every kid in the world in that class, right? You could somehow combine those things. But so it's a natural lead for teachers, educators to use space travel, robotic space travel, human space travel, the technology associated with it as a way to teach about science and technology and engineering and math, STEM, we call it, right? And, every kid does not have to grow up and become an astronomer or a planetary scientist or a robot engineer. But boy, wouldn't it be great if everyone in the world could think like that, could approach problem solving in a scientific or engineering way, whether they're an artist or a lawyer or a plumber or a scientist, whatever. Just having that, educational approach that the space program requires to be successful, thinking about contingencies, planning for every environment that you're going to be interacting with, understanding redundancy, backup systems. All it's just a way of life, thinking. And then why do you go? You're testing hypotheses. How do you react to the observations that come out, right? So education, I think, is a hugely intangible but important part of what the space program does. I mean, literally rewriting the textbooks for students around the world about what our solar system, our galaxy, our universe is like, what our planet is like, and how it fits in with what nature has built in terms of planets and stars out there. That's another one. So that's first. And the second intangible thing is maybe it's related, but it's just inspiration, right? Inspiration. Wow, look at that. Look at what those people did. Look at what that robot was able to achieve. Look at what this team was able to do. Look at how spectacular that place is. I hadn't even imagined. Or what a surprise to see this or that in that environment. Just the idea that we can escape, all of us, even those of us doing this job, we can escape our mundane human existence for a little while and vicariously experience the worlds around us through robotics, through telescopes, through computer models, through laboratory experiments, right? I find it just incredibly inspirational. Here in the US, we've decided as a society to spend a little under 0.5% of our immense national wealth on doing these things with NASA, right? It might not be a lot, but it's significant. It's a significant investment that we taxpayers make, that our representatives in Congress and presidential administrations make. It's an investment in those tangible technology returns. It's an investment in education, and it's an investment in inspiration. It inspires, kids to think big, dream big, imagine yourself in these environments. And no matter what they go on to do in life, having that spark inside of them I think it's something we all want.
Great.
Well, wonderful. We have quite a number of questions.
Yeah.
Haluk Levent has asked, what do you think about the critics of Niels Molen against the conceptualization of time of mainstream physics? Is time travel possible?
Gosh, I have no idea. Like I said, I'm a geologist. I go bang rocks with a hammer. However, I will speculate. If time travel were possible, wouldn't there be some good time travelers who wanted to make the world a better place, and all the horrible things that happen in our world would kind of get wiped away? I don't know. Maybe that's a subject of somebody's science fiction novel, but honestly, I don't know the answer, and I don't know if we can know the answer. So it's a great question.
Yeah, we have two related questions though. Your favorite sci-fi writer and book, and your reasons for choosing them. And the other one is, I don't know if you're a fan of space-themed science fiction movies, but I wonder if you watch them more by professional interest or as sole entertainment without much expectation of reality, if I might say. Do you feel frustrated if you come across incompatibilities of the images with our existing knowledge, particularly in recent works?
Yeah, no, it's great. Those are great questions. I'm afraid the questioner might not like my first answer. I just generally try not to read science fiction. I don't particularly care for it. I never have. I read a bunch of Isaac Asimov when I was younger. Great stuff, right? And really enjoyed that. But to me, and this is like an unusual answer, it's just too much like work, right? Why do you read? You read to escape. I read to escape, right? So I like reading biographies and poetry anthologies and stuff that's just nothing like work. So science fiction is just too much like work. And partly it's because of the second question, because it's frustrating sometimes. It's like, oh my God, how could they do that? This is impossible, right? And but what I've learned as I've gotten older is to, I think it's healthy to treat it as entertainment, right? The filmmaker, the author, generally, they're not trying to write a technologically accurate depiction of whatever, right? They're trying to tell a story about people, ultimately. And that's what most science fiction is. It's a story about people and what our human interactions or human alien interactions are going to be like in some imagined future or even some real future. So I have come to, be a fan of the entertainment factor, and there's a couple of different schools of thought, and I do watch science fiction movies. I don't mind spending a few hours and trying to work on my not getting frustrated on that, and some TV shows. And there's different camps. The original Star Trek series from the 1960s, created by Gene Roddenberry, very visionary, optimistic view of the future, a planet with no poverty, with no war, with no racism. You didn't even need money. Everybody's working together towards a common good. That's the original Star Trek world, and I grew up with that, and I share that optimism. Some say it's hopeless optimism, but I share a lot of that optimism. But I also enjoy the darker side of it. Some of the the Star Wars or the Battlestar Galactica or the Expanse, and the shows or movies that depict probably a much more realistic view of when humans move into the solar system. There will be greed and corruption and murders, and it's just probably inevitable that we'll need lawyers and cops in space, right? Just like we do on the planet here. And maybe that's a little bit depressing, but it's also perhaps realistic. Can we expect our species to change like that, right? After tens to hundreds of thousands of years of evolving to the way we are, being territorial, clan-oriented, fight or flight. These are things that are programmed, right? Deep in our cerebral cortex. And overcoming that is not going to happen overnight. And yet technology is propelling our species to places that we can never imagine being. So long, convoluted answer, but boo, I got a boo. I understand. It's okay.
I am skipping my question. I was going to ask your favorite poetry collection or biography, but I spare you that. And let's read Didem's question. Didem has a second question. How do you feel about the possible socioeconomic conditions of living on commercial corporate-run space stations or colonies? Should we expect conditions like company towns in US history, or some sort of East India Company, at least in early decades, centuries?
Yeah, there certainly is that potential. We have the potential to make the same mistakes that we made before in terms of colonization. And this is why most of my colleagues and I don't use the word colonize. It has so much baggage, so much bad history, right? We talk about settling a place. Colonization, and just the use of the word brings in an enormous and tragic history to our experience. Not entirely tragic, but mostly tragic history, especially for the indigenous population, right? And so we have the potential of making the same mistakes, absolutely, as a species. We also have the potential to learn from our mistakes, and it's a different environment because when previous colonists arrived at a new destination that they were going to set up a long-term establishment, there was oxygen, there was water, there was food when they got there, right? Now we're in a situation in space where it's very different, right? There's not going to be those things. We have to literally work together and work with technology just simply to stay alive. Forget about thriving, just simply to stay alive as a group. We're going to be reliant on everybody in that group who will have expertise related to keeping us alive. And it will be a luxury, and I think it's inevitable, and it'll be great. It'll be a luxury when we start being able to have music and art and film and all the luxuries of life that aren't just all about physically surviving. That aspect of humanity is going out into space as well. But at least initially, setting up a camp, building a base, building a town or whatever on the moon or on Mars or an asteroid, somewhere else, a satellite of Jupiter, whatever, is just going to be so incredibly difficult and so unprecedented. I mean, these places make Antarctica look like a tropical wonderland by comparison, right? And I think that might be a good model, the Antarctic, the way that we work there, that there's a treaty that the nations of the world agree nobody owns it. We share the scientific research there, share much of the infrastructure there. Nobody lives there. There were no indigenous population except for some penguins. And even then, we got to work hard not to mess them up. Yeah, it's a huge challenge. And I already tipped my hand. I'm an optimist, right? So I think we can do it. But am I certain that we won't make the same past mistakes? No, I'm not certain.
Diane has a question, Diane Sunar. She has asked, setting assumes no previous inhabitants, but could there be life forms that are unrecognizable as such to creatures that evolved on Earth?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and sort of a two-part answer. You know, we often talk about searching for life on other planets, on something we do on Mars and elsewhere in the solar system, look for evidence of life. But it has to be life as we know it, right? It has to be carbon-based. It has to use organic molecules, heat sources, energy sources, water, liquid water. That's life as we know it. That's what we can look for. Sort of by definition, scientifically, we can't search for life as we don't know it. The only way to do that is if it just something walks in front of our camera that or flies or hops or whatever that we just is completely unrecognizable. We had no way to search for it. And that's not really much of a search. That's an accidental discovery. And that might happen. But realistically, the scientific community is working from the hypothesis that life elsewhere out there is similar enough to life here on our planet, which is all the same, by the way. All life on our planet is related. There's one form of life on our planet, DNA, RNA-based life forms, magnificent diversity that evolution has produced, but it's one kind of life. And that maybe, you know, we can test for on other planets, is that kind of life there? Organic molecules, heat sources, water. Maybe the specific bonds in the DNA kind of molecule that transmits the information of life could be different, but the idea is the same. And it still involves all the elements on the periodic table that we know and love here on the Earth. Those are the same elements in the same periodic table on Mars or Jupiter or the Andromeda Galaxy. Doesn't matter. So that's kind of like the underlying assumption. So then what if we do find evidence? What if we find evidence that Mars has microbial life deep underground, right? Does it mean we stop exploring Mars? I don't know. I don't think we would stop exploring Mars, but we should at least do everything we can to characterize that life and see if it's somehow related, really related to life on Earth. Did Mars seed life on Earth? Did Earth seed life on Mars? Was there some common source from asteroids and comets impacting the planets over time that brought these organic molecules to the surface of a planet like that? And life therefore is inevitable. And so life is inevitable all across the galaxy. I mean, you know, these are big questions. And we have a chance of answering at least somewhat questions like that by studying the planets around us. And so should we try to do that before contaminating or perhaps accidentally destroying that life? I think we have an ethical obligation to do that, but it's just an ethical obligation. There's no laws, there's no rules. It's a little bit of the Wild West.
One more question, and this is from Tonguç, actually. Tonguç Sezen. How do you imagine the use of local construction materials in building colonies on other planets, moons, or asteroids in our solar system? It's getting more and more technical, Jim.
No, it's good. It's good. It's a great question, and it really gets back to the sustainability issue that I answered before, right? I mean, yes, you could have a base on the moon, a settlement on Mars, whatever, that is constantly resupplied from the Earth. You bring everything, bring the food, bring the water, bring the bricks, bring the mortar, right? And yeah, you could do that. Economically, it's very expensive. Technologically, it's very expensive and time consuming. And so there will be an emphasis wherever we go and whenever we go out into the solar system on how do we live off the land? How do we use local resources, right? So there's ice on the moon, right? There's ice in these permanently shadowed craters at the North Pole and the South Pole of the moon. It's buried, it's hard to access, but it will make more sense for people living on a moon base to get their water and oxygen and rocket fuel from that ice than constantly shipping water, hydrogen, and oxygen from the Earth. Eventually, it will make more sense. Makes even more sense for Mars because it's such a long trip, 6 to 9 months each way to bring stuff. You can only launch every couple of years for the most efficient launch opportunities. So living off the land, there's water ice there. There's, rocks with iron and other metals there. And so, figuring out how to live off the land anywhere we go, just like colonists and settlers of the past, is going to be absolutely critical. Yeah.
I have a question though. Yeah, how do you
Attracted
feel?
my attention. Aslı, were you saying something? Sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you feel about, wealthy businessmen investing on space exploration and make it, like an entertainment or pop, to go to moon or Mars or space,
Yeah. No, it's another great question. And, the thing is, at least in the US, it's kind of always been that way, right? It was millionaires and billionaires that were first taking trips in these crazy metal boxes with wings on them to go from place to place, right? And before that, it was wealthy business people, millionaires and billionaires, who were hopping in a weird steam-powered device with wheels, riding along tracks, and people with the first technology to talk to somebody a long distance away through a wire, and probably back to the caveman days. Some wealthy caveman had a new club, with some new, it probably goes all the way back. And it really has been that a lot of innovation is driven by a very small sector of technology, of society, with the means to fund advanced technology, especially highly risky advanced technology. Now, one thing that most people don't realize is that most of these wealthy people, going back through all those examples, were partially funded by the government, right? It was the government that paid big contracts for these airline companies in the 1920s to deliver the mail. They paid for it. They seeded them. They helped these companies get safer, advance their technology. Some of those companies are still around, but the entire global airline industry came out of that government investment from not just the US, but other countries as well. And, it took 100 years, 50 to 100 years for that to happen. And the same thing happened with the railroads and the telephone and the internet, right? And the same thing is happening with space. NASA puts hundreds of millions of dollars into some of these companies to help them advance their technology, increase their safety, deliver supplies to the space station, deliver people to the space station. Sort of mundane activities that really NASA doesn't want to do, because NASA wants to be exploring the frontier, not delivering the mail, right? And so it kind of makes sense. And it also helps advance that technology and the safety, reliability, lower the cost, so that space tourism is going to become a real thing. I wrote a whole book about this. A couple hundred years in the future, hey, let's take the weekend on the moon. Yeah, let's do that. It's going to be there. It's going to happen. I think it's going to take time. It's going to take many decades to build that safety, that reliability, lower the cost, just like for the airline industry. And so I don't have a problem with it being led by rich people, as long as they're visionary, and most of them are, and some of them are putting a fair amount of their own money into it as well. Of course, they're business people. They're hoping to make some money back eventually, but they've got the long game in mind. So I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Aslı, do you think it's almost time we start?
Yeah, I think
closing remarks.
We can wrap up. Well, thank you so much, for this very interesting conversation. Thank you for our listeners for their contribution. That was a very inspiring talk. Thank you, Jim and Feride, for this. I hope we will go on with our global transformation series among different researchers from different disciplines. I think this will be a great tradition for both institutions coming together with interesting topics and academicians and researchers, and to find fun and interesting subjects. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Jim, for your time.
It's just delightful. So grateful to be asked to participate. So honored, Feride, to be in this conversation with you. And I look forward to hosting you guys and anybody else from Istanbul, part of this collaboration, in the desert Southwest, in the Mars-like desert Southwest. At some future time, it'll be great to actually be able to get together. And again, I'm an optimist, so that world is coming back. So
Yeah.
looking forward to that.
Looking forward to too. Thank you so much.
Jim, thank you for everything and mainly for your optimism. I think I'll need it from time to time.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.